Hey there, everybody. This is Sinué Montoya and John Case back at it again with another episode of Daily Battlefield Applied.
Woohoo! Hello, everybody. Welcome back.
Hey, good to see you, John.
Good to see you, sir. Always
Handsome,
happy.
handsome as always.
Appreciate it, sir. Appreciate it. Likewise, by the way, likewise. I think we're finally starting to get this video setup dialed in. You look better and better every time.
Yeah, well, I've increased the filter count, so there you go.
I love the technology.
Hey, tell me in as few words as possible about today.
Secret.
Oh, you missed. Today's going to be a great day, baby.
Oh, gotcha. I thought you meant specifically the show. Oh, it's always a great day. The minute your feet hit the floor, today's going to be a great day.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's Thursday too. So we're recording. I can't tell you, like, Thursdays are quickly becoming my favorite day of the week.
Thursday, man, this Thursday's been really, I got booked up quite a bit. My business has continued to grow, man. So I'm eternally happy about that.
That's awesome.
I shouldn't say eternally because I have moments of self-doubt, and we're going to talk about that.
Well, speaking of which, let's, as we seg right into the podcast, let me start off by asking you a question that I'm going to ask you every single time we start the podcast, which is, how are you feeling today on the feeling wheel, as opposed to, as it relates to your business?
So I'm feeling very excited and overjoyous, and it has more to do on a personal note. My family moved closer to where I live. I live in Twin Falls, Idaho.
Nice.
And my in-laws just moved. Most people would say, "Oh, that's not wonderful," but I love my in-laws. They're great.
That's good, man. That's real good. And
how about you?
Optimistic, very optimistic today, especially based on the subject matter that we're going to be talking about, kind of the things that we're going to touch on today. Listening to what we listened to prior to today's recording really got the old creative juices flowing again. And so, yes, very, very optimistic.
You know what? I share that sentiment. Yesterday, I was optimistic as hell. And I still am today. I'm still on that high of my in-laws moved in. They got here last night. But I'm optimistic for several reasons. I won't get into too many details, but the future is what I make of it.
Indeed, right? I believe that's from Terminator, 3? Terminator 2, something like that?
There's not a lot of future in Terminator. I don't know if I would.
I believe that's like a direct quote. I'll you know what? We'll find out. We'll share it on the next episode. But I'm pretty sure in one of those, that's exactly the line that they say.
Well, you know what? That's a perfect segue for today's topic.
Main topic, yeah.
Yep. And I'm gonna let you introduce it because you introduced it to me. I love it. Please tell the perfect audience.
Thank you. So I came across a recording on YouTube many, many years ago by a gentleman by the name of Earl Nightingale. The name of the recording is The Strangest Secret in the World, right? The Strangest Secret, if you will, for short. And it's about a 31-minute recording. It's an old audio recording. And it really kind of changed my approach to a lot of things. And every time that I've listened to it since, I pick up on new little nuggets in there. It's almost, it's kind of like when you read a book multiple times, there's different things that stand out to you and different things that you can pick out. Similar thing with this recording. And I've listened to this recording a lot. But this time was the first time that I actually listened to it with a real intent, in the sense of not just pulling something out for myself that I could use and apply in my life, but potentially something else that stands out that could be transmitted here through these airwaves to share with folks as we have our discussion.
So, I got to tell you that I've heard of Earl Nightingale. I listen to other podcasts as well. I've mentioned that to you in previous episodes. One of them being Brian Buffini's. He changed the title of the show, but the point I'm making is that that's actually where I was introduced to Earl Nightingale, and I've listened to some of his recordings. This recording is actually quite old, relatively speaking. 1956. I looked it up. It was the first talking record where they were speaking rather than music that went gold.
Oh, look at you. Okay, that's excellent information. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, I did a little bit of research on the record. Oh, I should say on the recording.
Well, it is a record, though. You're right, because it was a record that was then turned into an MP3 file that was then uploaded into YouTube. But to your point, back in 1956, this was most certainly a record.
So it's really, really, for me, impactful. because I hate to say this. I'm ashamed to admit this.
Okay, where are you going with this?
I think negatively
Uh,
sometimes.
a
Yeah.
lot of people do.
Yep.
A lot of us do, actually.
And I have questions about that. Okay. I have
Mhm.
questions about that. But um, one of the points that Mr. Nightingale made in this recording was he likened the mind of the human to the earth. I love that analogy because he said with the earth, it will grow whatever you put into it. And he said, if you put in a nightshade seed, which is a
Poison. Yep.
poison, yeah,
Mhm.
or a corn seed, it'll grow, right? And if you feed it, it'll continue to grow, right? So
Mhm.
I have been susceptible in the past to feeding negative thoughts. So I'm planting that nightshade,
Mhm. Mhm.
and your mind will grow whatever you plant into it. So one of the things that before even before this, we talked about daily habits a few episodes ago through the book Tiny Habits, and it said something very similar. Thinking negatively is a bad habit. But let me ask you, John, why do you feel it's so easy to think negatively?
Well, that's a great question. Why do I think? Because it's easy. Because here's the thing, to think positively, I think requires a certain level of action on your part. Number one, you have to become aware of your thoughts. Number two, you have to realize that they're negative. And then number three, you have to do something about it. Whereas in the alternative, you just kind of let things go. And I would add this to the equation. We live in a society where negativity sells. Think about the news, think about what you see online. A lot of folks love the blood, the gore, the real terrible stuff. You throw up a news story about puppies being adopted or the new children's center that was opened. It's not going to get as many clicks as the insert whatever terrible story into this equation. So I do think on some level we are affected by our environment, and our environment tends to be, at least for the folks that are making money off of it, tends to be negative. So it's kind of the easier road, if you will, to really think positively, to think creatively, to think outside the box does require effort, and it's a skill, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. Thinking positively is a skill for the three things you mentioned earlier. It requires effort, and it just requires more effort to think positively. Um, Whereas I think thinking negative is almost like a default, right? So I think the way in which I could simplify this for myself and for those listening, it's very rare when you hear somebody say, "Oh, did you hear about so and so? Something great happened to them, and they put in all the hard work and they got all the results."
Indeed, it is absolutely.
Yeah, you're laughing in agreement, unfortunately.
It is
Uh,
because I mean, I hate to interrupt you, but you're so spot on. Most of the time, it would be the exact opposite, right? Like, did you hear about so and so? They did this terrible thing, and now these are the consequences of whatever it is that they did.
well,
Rarely do you hear the opposite.
well, actually, you know what? I'm going to give you. I think you're taking it too far in the sense that people think of the consequences. They don't most often. They don't think of they just think of like, "Oh, did you hear about so and so? Her boyfriend cheated on her, and he got somebody else pregnant, and her life sucks, or his life sucks, or whatever."
Mhm,
Because it's easy to talk about the negative, the gossip, right?
mhm.
You're spot on to say it is a skill to think negative because it just requires so much more effort.
Positive, mean to think positive.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, to
Yeah, yeah.
think positive. It requires so much more effort to think positive, to
Mhm,
have a worthwhile thought. Because when you think positive, you think of, at least I do, and I would imagine a lot of successful people do too as well, do so as well. When you think positive, you start to think of what you want to happen, which if you do it right, starts to turn into goals. All right. And then it starts to, if you have goals, then you should start forming plans. And then the action should follow the plans. And now I've lost like 50% of the population. They're like, oh man, you know what? I'm just gonna watch TV.
Right, right.
So I asked that question, why it's so easy to think negative, because I have lived in that trap for too long.
Well, let me give you, I don't know where I've heard this, and walk with me through this example. My guess is this. for a very long time, we as humans had to be very cognizant, very aware of our surroundings, right? Because if you went out at the wrong time, the saber-toothed tiger snatched you and you were never seen again. Or if you weren't paying attention, you stepped on the snake and then the snake did what a snake does, and then you're no longer around. So I think our mind has a tendency to walk that fine line of thinking about all the terrible things that might happen if you're not really paying attention to your thoughts. Do you see what I'm saying? Like your mind automatically, well, if I go outside, I'm going to get eaten by the tiger. And if I get eaten by a tiger, then my family has nobody to bring home food. And then the rest of my family is going to starve. And da, da, da. So immediately your mind starts racing in the negative space, if you will, because a lot of times these actions did have very negative consequences if you weren't paying attention. Okay. Now let's fast forward to today. We live in relatively safe times, if you will, and so that, but the mechanisms and the machine is still that archaic machine that we brought forward in time, right?
Yep.
So it's learning how to adapt that machine to the current societal needs, as opposed to how it originally evolved back in the day. Like I said, this is just a theory, just something that I've kind of, put together in as we go along in the different readings and information that I've come across. That seems to be at least my kind of general idea of the mind will usually work. And to a certain extent, it's to protect you. It's like, look, if you don't pay attention, the snake's going to get you. And then if the snake gets you, there's all these terrible consequences that happen from there. And so the trick is we have to pay attention to that and then redirect that energy maybe toward the end that we're seeking, as opposed to letting our mind fill in the gaps. Our mind's going to try to make sense of things. Our mind is going to, if we don't tell it how those gaps are filled, our mind will fill those gaps for us.
Oh,
and
my
generally,
goodness, yes.
they tend to be not great things.
Poorly filled.
Correct.
So, you mentioned here the word energy, right? And the modern way of talking about or referencing The Strangest Secret is a book that came out in, I think, 2005, somewhere thereabout. It was called titled The Secret.
Rhonda Byrne.
Yep. So The Secret is the modern version of The Strangest Secret. And in it, there's a lot of talk of the law of attraction, right? And Mr. Nightingale references that you can think things into existence. And to a certain degree, I would agree with that. There could be a lot of self-fulfilling prophecies that, we just talk about it, and they're usually negative, and they become a reality. And one of the easiest examples to reference right now is if you go anywhere on social media, everybody's talking about a recession, right? This recording is taking place July 28th, 2022. And can you conceive that there would be a recession based on where we are right now? Yeah, absolutely.
And to your point, and I apologize for interrupting. We have a tendency to speak things into existence. It's almost like people, and on a certain level, if I need your attention and I'm the news, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about, before this, it was economic collapse, economics crash, economic crash. Then the narrative changed a little bit. Now it's recession. Before that, it was pandemic. Before that, it was election. So it's almost like there are these talking points that are, I guess, developed, or maybe a clear consensus within the folks who are disseminating the information is made of, these are what we're going to talk about. And from there, it just goes from one to the other. Not that the current economic times are necessarily controlled by us per se, but yes, there is that overarching sentiment. And I do think that sentiment sometimes spills over into the actual folks who make the decisions and ultimately where we end up.
So yes, I agree. However, where I would deviate from the what do you call it, the bandwagon, at least try to deviate, is in making my own future myself, right? So there's all this stuff happening, but I can control how I think, which, if I do it right, controls my actions. And if I take proper action, I can control the outcomes to a certain degree, right? The one thing that I always, you and I, or anybody for that matter, actually, I take that back. Very, very strongly. Most people can control their thoughts and their emotions, right? Not everybody. And that's really the only thing that you have control over in life, your thoughts and your emotions, although it's easy to lose control of them with negative thought, as we've talked about. But going back to, the law of attraction and thinking it into existence, Mr. Nightingale says in the recording that the idea itself is worthless. You have to have action, right? And then he goes on to say, writing down goals and carrying a card, a 3x5 card with whatever your goal is. He calls it a 30-day challenge. Write down whatever you want to accomplish and think about it for 30 days, act on it, and put in more effort than is required of you. Okay. So he's big on that. So I don't want to lose sight of the fact that while you still have to think positive, that takes a lot of effort. It still takes effort and planning and action to bring everything else into fruition. Otherwise, what I like to say is you have wishes.
But it starts with a wish. So where I push back on that is there's some people that can't even get to the wish stage. There's some people that don't have the capacity to even get to the wish stage. Getting to the wish stage is an actual legitimate accomplishment that should be celebrated, because there's so many of us that can't even, not to say that everything that you stated isn't indeed true, because at some point there will be correlating action necessary to execute your goal. So you're right. But much like you weren't aware of the recording before we had this conversation, I guarantee you there's a whole lot of other people who are also unaware of their ability and capability to direct their life in a certain direction, to your point, within controlling the things that we can't control. And the key thing for me from this recording, and he says it very plainly, we become what we think about.
Yep.
And thinking takes energy. People don't realize sometimes, or if they do, maybe that's why they don't do it. But thinking requires a whole heck of a lot of energy.
So it does. While I wasn't aware of this recording before, I was looking at it in hindsight, which is not 2020, right? Foresight, or hindsight is 2020. I meant foresight is not. But I always looked at it as where I am in my life is a direct result of all the actions that I've taken or not taken, right? So accountability of what I've done or not done to lead me to where I am. Now, the wish stage is, for me, I have a problem with the wish stage because it's very easy to get stuck in it. And it's very easy to continue wishing, and then time passes and you don't realize. So I have a different take on that, but I do wholeheartedly agree with, writing down your goals, because once you write it down, especially as he mentions it, you put it on a card or on a Post-it, and you carry it with you. Now you have this tangible thing. It's literally in writing. You could touch it, you could feel it, you could look at it, you could show it to somebody, and it's a real thing that you now are working towards. He's really big on that. And I really, really like that, because that's the action is what's going to take your wish to, if you do it right, to the outcome that you're looking for.
I agree with everything that you just said. The only sort of cherry on top that I would add to that is you have to be very clear as to what it is that you're hoping to accomplish, aka your goal, right? Because he clearly states you have to, because even in the way he describes it, he says you have to wish it, and wish it completely. So many people wake up and today I want a Ferrari, then they wake up tomorrow and they're like, well, I'll want a Mustang, and then the next day, you know what, a Toyota Prius would be more applicable to my the service that I provide. And then the next day, you know what, I enjoy walking, I don't need a car. Well, if you're constantly moving the goalposts, constantly changing what it is that you're going after, it's very hard to ever get to that end stage. And so for me, what we're calling the wish stage is really the critical portion, because that's where you delineate and decide what it is that you want, and then you completely and solely focus on it. I'm assuming when you started your company, when you started Drone Quote, that was the only thing that you had on your mind.
Yeah,
there wasn't anything. You weren't thinking about other jobs. You weren't thinking about other opportunities. You weren't thinking about, well, maybe I could also do XYZ. You were like, this is what I want to do. I need to figure out the steps to accomplish this. And then boom, one by one started, whether it's registering your LLC, making sure your paperwork's in compliance, getting your insurance, figuring out what you're selling, how you're going to sell it, developing a website, everything that goes along with your business. That was the sole sort of idea you were constantly thinking. As a matter of fact, let me ask you this: how often do you think about your own quote now?
Well, I mean, I live in thought of drone quote.
In essence, kind of sort of give validation to what he's saying, right? Drone quote doesn't exist if you don't think about it constantly.
Yep.
And yes, it did take action, but it started with a thought. It started with an idea. It started with a wish.
That's true.
That's what we're calling that, right?
So the reason why I guess I struggle with that, and what I'm also struggling with from what I took away from that recording is, my 30-day challenge. What is that 30-day challenge? And honestly, man, I have had a hard time putting that together in my head, because it has to be specific. It has to be specific. Like you said, a Ferrari. That's a specific vehicle, but how do you get to that Ferrari, right? Mm-hmm. So I absolutely am subscribed to the idea that you have to write down the goal, but you have to be specific, and you have to put some plan behind it so that you can take action, because the action is the steps of the plan. If I give you $1 million right now to hit the target, and I say, go ahead, hit the target, but I don't tell you what the target is, you're not going to hit it.
Right.
Well, I got to tell you, I really enjoy, the opportunity to have these recordings with you. And I really enjoy the learning. More importantly, the learning in between these recordings, where we could, dissect what it is that we learned in between, because it's allowing me to grow at a rate that I would not otherwise be growing, given that we're, having to get into and digest and dissect these learnings and these recordings and these books that we're getting into.
Absolutely, man. No, and I appreciate you taking the time to walk through this with me. As a matter of fact, I'm thinking, depending on our schedule, we may want to kind of revisit this possibly even next week, because I really do believe that this recording offers so much. If anything, we just barely started to scratch the surface. I mean, it's 31 minutes, but it's just jam-packed full of information.
So much knowledge.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would say that another way by telling you that this audio recording is going to make it into a rotation that is reoccurring.
The Drone Code Hall of Fame.
Yeah, man, this is such valuable information.
Absolutely.
Alrighty, folks. This has been another episode that we brought to you of Daily Battlefield Applied. Really appreciate you guys jumping in and listening with us. We strongly encourage you to listen to The Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale.
Guys, we'll make sure we include, it's all over the internet, it's all over YouTube, but we'll include the link that we listen to so that you guys have an opportunity to listen to as well. If you do get to listen to it, leave a comment. Let us know what you thought. Is it something that you're interested in? Do you kind of agree with what Earl is saying, or are you more in line to think otherwise? And if you did take that 30-day challenge, definitely let us know what you selected and how it's going. And as always, guys, thank you so much for listening.
You guys take care.
See you on the next one.